Hey everybody, this is Jeremy Sims, your Democratic candidate for Texas House District 91. I want to welcome you and all your friends out there in Facebook land to our Facebook Live Friday. We do this every week at 6:30 p.m. mainly because I really believe that when you run for office, you should get out there and talk to people and hear what they have to say so that when you get in office, you can go and represent them. Unfortunately, we can't do that like we did in 2018, where we were out knocking on doors and talking to people in their front yard about what they really cared about. So this is one way that we can put a focus or highlight on one issue every week and make it something that maybe will spark a question for you out there and give you a chance to ask a question of me and somebody who actually works on whatever the policy is and knows really smart answers that I don't know the answer to. So along those lines, I am very excited to have our guest today. Lindsey Walker is our guest, Walter is our guest today. She's the Senior Policy Advisor for Climate and Energy at Third Way, which is a national think tank based in Washington, D.C., champions modern center-left ideas. I love that. And Lindsey manages the climate policy portfolio, developing and advocating for federal policies to drive innovation and deployment of clean energy technologies in order to reach net zero emissions by mid-century. That is a lot to go over. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So before we get into everything, I just want to remind everybody that we do this as part of our campaign. And so in order to keep our lights on for our campaign and all these efforts that we have to try to get out the vote going, we really need your support. We as a campaign have an awesome volunteer coordinator. Karen will get in touch with you and plug you in wherever you think you can be helpful. We're writing postcards to send to voters when it gets close to time to get out the vote. We are writing letters to voters that we know are Democrats who are not yet registered to vote in our district, and we really are trying to get them registered to vote, because studies show that if you register someone to vote, they are very likely to get out and vote that election. So we already know they're Democrats, but for every $2 that you chip in, you're going to enable us to send out a pre-filled voter registration form that is trackable, that we can reach out to try to register all these Democrats in our district. So please go to the website. It is votesims.com and chip in your $2 or $2 million, whatever. You know by now that Texas does not have any campaign finance restrictions. So as long as you're an individual and not a corporation, you can write that check or go on the website and dump all your cash. As long as you're not expecting anything in return for your vote, I'm good for that. There's all kinds of other ways that we are keeping people plugged into the campaign. Like I said, please get in touch through the website and let us know how you'd like to help. If you want to send text to people through our texting system or phone bank and call people to talk to them about whether they're going to vote for Democrats in November, that would really help us out. We're doing all these ways. Everything that you can imagine, we are trying to do to get out the vote in November. If we can bring you in, Lindsey, on any of these news items that you want to talk about, but a lot of this, I do try to go over some quick hits on the news about what's going on, because I know so many of you guys really just can't anymore. And sometimes, depending on the day, I can't either. But I want to make sure that you know that there are things that are going on out there in the world that are important and we should pay attention to. And number one on my list today was RBG, our Justice Ginsburg, released today that she is receiving chemo treatments for liver cancer again. And she has posted that the results look promising. And she's going to continue to do her work for the court. But if you're a praying person, please send your prayers. And if you're not, send your good thoughts and good energy and whatever else it is. Because I think we all know that Mitch McConnell is going to just do whatever he can to replace her if the opportunity arises. We don't want that to happen. That's really the only thing I want to talk about as far as national goes, because it's a mess up there. As far as the Texas news goes, the Texas Republican Party was supposed to have their convention in Houston at the convention center this week. There was a whole back and forth where the mayor said, no, it's not safe, and they shut it down. But then the as of today, the party joined a lawsuit that was brought by a couple of activists, and they have won the right to have their convention in person in Houston, both this weekend and next weekend. So their executive committee has not held another emergency meeting, which I think went till 1 a.m. last night. But anyway, keep an eye on that. I think they are, there are some people in their party who really want to get together. So we'll see what happens with that. Speaking of getting together, in Fort Worth this week, there is a NASCAR race that is going on. They've had some races that in the past where just the drivers and their crews were there. We're actually having fans in the stands here at our NASCAR race. So they're running it at half capacity, which is only 100,000 of your friends and neighbors who can go participate in the race in the stands. So maybe send some prayers for these people also, because that is not a safe place to be. Don't go there. Schools reopening has been a really big thing in the news this week. It's been a very fluid situation. I would encourage you to please make your voice known. Call the Tarrant County Commissioners or the judge of the Commissioners Court or our Tarrant County Public Health Administrator. All of these people are the people who can make a decision as to whether our public schools have in-person school or not. And this is all because of Governor Abbott's executive orders and how it's written and the TEA. There's just so many different moving parts to this, but it all comes down to the state is not going to prevent schools from opening. In fact, they want them to open for in-person learning. But at the same time, they also understand, I think, that it is not entirely safe. And so they've carved out this area where local control has the ability to prevent it happening. So right now, it looks like many of the superintendents and the boards have decided that it's not safe, and they're going to delay at least for 4 weeks, if not longer in most cases, either the opening or the in-person opening, and do remote learning only. So I urge you to stay plugged in on that, because it really is going to affect the most vulnerable among us and our teachers. And I worry about them and their families. So anyway, I wasn't trying to dominate the conversation. I had all these things on my list, but they're not necessarily big national news. Coronavirus is continuing to spread. We had 474 new cases as of today in Tarrant County. We are still at the substantial level, although it's never changed since I've looked at it. And we're up to 288 total deaths in Tarrant County from coronavirus. Was there any news that you wanted to throw into the mix, Lindsey?
Well, we talked about one thing that was exciting on the climate and energy front this week, which was a federal judge rejected Trump's rollback of some Obama era methane rules, which is really exciting to see. And, oftentimes these lawsuits are the final line to protect some of our environmental regulations. So it was exciting that we had a win this week and have gone back to some of our federal regulation around methane. So yeah, it's a win.
Okay, well, we should take our wins where we can. Yeah. In this environment. So one of the things that I was so excited to have this opportunity to have you on Facebook Live, because the items that you focus on really are kind of at the center of what Texas is all about as far as politics and its economy, because the old adage is that Texas is built on oil and gas, and that really drives our economy, from jobs to profits and ancillary jobs, and it affects our environment and everything. Kind of like it even impacts the funding for our schools and many of the other things that we do with our state budget. So it's just like, this is the perfect topic to drive every other conversation that has to do with Texas politics. So thank you for agreeing to be on today. Can you tell us a little bit about you and what your organization does?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me, Jeremy. I'm excited to dive into this topic as well. So I am the Senior Policy Advisor for Third Way. We're a think tank based in Washington, D.C., and I work for our climate and clean energy program. And so the mission of our program is to use all zero carbon technologies that we can, including nuclear, renewables, storage, carbon capture, the entire gamut, in order to put the United States on the path to net zero emissions by 2050 at the very latest. So I work mainly on developing and advocating for policies at the federal level. And one of the reasons why we focus so much on using this entire suite of clean energy technologies is because it can help us reach our climate goals faster and at lower cost. So we put a lot of focus on the development, innovation, and deployment of these clean energy technologies. It's also really important that we ensure an affordable and fair transition. And part of this is keeping energy affordable for all Americans across the country, and also making sure that all communities can benefit from the clean energy transition. So I manage our climate policy portfolio, and right now I've been doing a lot of work around how to recover from the current public health and economic crises while still advancing our climate goals. So that's been a major focus of mine over the past few months.
That's awesome. I love that the justice has a place in this topic, because I feel like that often gets missed when we talk about energy in Texas, because there's so much money that goes right to the top, but we often forget about the people who are impacted by the environmental changes, but also possible job losses and the follow-on effects from that when it happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And, particularly in Texas, the oil and gas industry has been hit hard by coronavirus and other industries as well. So, this is a topic. I think you can't talk about economic recovery, public health without also talking about the climate crisis, because the impacts are so wide and varied.
Awesome. So I know that you have your finger on the pulse of exactly what's going on, and have been tracking, you and your organization been tracking what's going on with the Trump administration. And while the seat that I'm not running for is not a national seat, it's important to know what is going on. So can you just kind of give us an idea of what's been going on as far as this policy goes at the national level?
Yeah, definitely. So the Trump administration has made a concerted effort to roll back some of the most important environmental and climate legislation and regulation that we have in this country. And so there have been over 100 different rollbacks of environmental regulation. 68 are already completed. Maybe 67 now that they rolled back the methane rule. So I'll have to fact check myself. And then 32 are still in progress. And so, this has dismantled some of the most important and only climate legislation that we had, or regulation that we have at the federal level. So this includes rolling back or freezing the fuel efficiency standards for cars. It includes replacing the Clean Power Plan with something called the Affordable Clean Energy Rule, which is neither affordable nor clean. And it actually would kill one person for every 3 coal mining jobs saved, and make 16 children sick for every 1 coal mining job saved, which seems like a not so great trade-off in my opinion. It includes rolling back standards protecting our nation's streams and water and wetlands from water pollution. And even during the pandemic, they've been moving forward trying to expand logging and oil drilling in Alaska. So it's been a relentless effort by the Trump administration to dismantle our environmental regulations. But luckily there have been a couple rules, at least 10, that have been either reinstated because of lawsuits. And, the example just this week was a federal judge blocking the Trump rollback of the methane regulations for oil and gas on federal lands. So awesome. That's kind of a bleak outlook, but that's an overview of where their priorities are at.
It's crazy to me that one of the things that they wanted to roll back was the emission standards for cars, because at the time, the automobile manufacturers were like, no, please don't do that. We worked really hard on this and you're not benefiting us.
And that's been the case for a lot of these regulations that they've rolled back. People from the industries that work in them are saying, no, we don't want that. We've already invested in the technologies. It's good for us. Even the methane rules, you had oil and gas companies coming out and saying, no, don't roll those back. So, it's been really fascinating. And the fuel efficiency standards are the prime example of that.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. At night, that's one of those things I will sit there and think about, why are they doing this? And then I remember, oh, there's probably not a good answer for this. So, okay. As far as Texas goes, I know that you guys are national, but you have a lot of knowledge and have built up some resources about all kinds of different energy use and policy. And one of those things that is most interesting to people in our area is fracking, because there's so much fracking that has gone on in the past and still is going on. And it affects our economy in tremendous ways, from people who get royalties to people who have jobs to people who do all kinds of things related to the industry. What information can you give us that's kind of up to date as far as fracking goes?
Yeah, so beyond the news that happened this week, there are a couple of different things to talk about when you're talking about fracking. And, we were kind of discussing this the other day. One of the big ones is methane regulations, because fracking has a huge impact on our climate and our local air pollution. And methane is one big issue that we need to deal with on that front. There was no federal regulation at all on fracking until 2016. And that was rolled back in 2018 by the Trump administration and just put back in place this week. So, but it's great. This was the first step in what I would consider many actions that need to be taken to reduce the amount of methane that's either flared or leaked from the natural gas process. And this was only on federal lands. It did not deal with methane leaks that are coming from processing or transmission or distribution. It was just in the production phase. And I believe it was only for new oil and gas wells. So we still have some strides that we need to make in order to regulate methane at the federal level. Another big aspect, and I think this has come into play in a district close to yours, Jeromey, is the issues with the local environmental issues of fracking. And one of those being water contamination and air pollution. I guess that's two, not one. But
yeah, it's been a while since it was in the news, but that's really important. And I feel like it's something that doesn't get the coverage that it deserves just because so much else is going on in the news.
Yeah, and the EPA actually doesn't regulate fracturing fluids at all. It's actually exempt from the Safe Drinking Water Act, or it was never in there. So, that's one of the reasons why you might not see a lot on it, is because the regulation for it is really scarce. And some states will have their own regulations. Colorado and California have a couple good ones when it comes to fracking, but Texas is really lax with the regulation for fracking inside the state. And so, this is another large environmental justice issue at the local level, because it's really the communities next to fracking where, when things go wrong, they have to suffer the impacts from it. Yeah. And then, another thing I wanted to mention on the waterfront is that fracking takes a lot of water to frack a well. It takes 3.6 million gallons to frack a single well, like per fracture. And so in a state like Texas, where you guys deal with a lot of drought and will continue to deal with more extreme heat and drought because of increasing impacts of climate change, this is another issue where the state has to balance water resources as well. And so that's another kind of nuance in the water management area of fracking.
Right. And so, as it relates to fracking, I know that you guys are not anti-fracking, right? There's still these wells are already out there. It's kind of a landed cost as far as many of the resources go. What is the position of Third Way, and what kind of ideas do you guys bring to the table?
Yeah, so we're not for a across the board fracking ban. We support banning fracking on all public lands. One issue with an across the board ban on fracking is that the demand for natural gas is still so high. And so even with local bans or state bans, you're still getting that natural gas imported if you're not producing it in your area. And in a way that's just kind of pushing off some of the local environmental issues with fracking to other communities. And so this is where we believe that there needs to be much stricter regulation at the federal level to deal with methane, as I was talking about earlier, but also to have better standards in place for the managing the wastewater, for building better wells and ensuring that those prevent any sort of leakage into local water sources, and also making sure that the oil and gas companies are being transparent about the chemicals that they're using, and making sure that that's clear to the public. And so, one thing is, we believe that you need to institute these at the federal level in order to ensure an equitable approach across the country. And so far, this kind of state by state approach has not been very successful.
Yep, I hear you. As far as not being very successful, it brings to mind the TCEQ, and their unlevel is not the right word, but like not consistent view and enforcement of the regulations that actually had already been put on the books in Texas. You've mentioned methane a couple of times, and that's the one that like comes to my mind when I think about fracking and the TCEQ. There were regulations that the state actually passed to limit methane, and maybe you can tell us why methane is so like important to the climate conversation. But those regulations themselves still got rolled back and not enforced, and it's because of TCEQ.
Yes, and I did a little bit of digging after you raised this to me and pulled some facts on TCEQ. But to start, methane has a global warming potential significantly higher than carbon dioxide. So it's a much more potent greenhouse gas, and it doesn't last as long, but has a larger impact. So, over the next 20 years, methane traps 80 times more heat in our atmosphere than carbon dioxide. So this is one reason why methane is so important. And, we have some studies trying to monitor how much methane is being vented or leaked from oil and gas production. And, there was a recent study that came out estimating that it's 60% more than current official government estimates. So this issue is a little bit bigger than I think our current government is acknowledging. As far as the Texas CEQ goes, so I was doing some research, and even right now they have been granting waivers to companies that are, because of the coronavirus, and the EPA told states or companies that they didn't need to inform federal regulators if they were violating certain air or water pollution standards. And so that falls to the states, and the Texas CEQ has taken a really lax approach on it and has granted over or around 150 waivers for companies, including major oil and gas companies like ExxonMobil and Shell, and basically use this as an excuse to provide waivers to allow them to continue to not monitor the leaks of methane and they're called like VOCs. They're just volatile organic compounds, other things that impact your health when you breathe these in the air.
Right. Yep. VOCs to me reminds me of when I may date myself, but back in the day, hairspray used to have VOCs in it, and it was a whole big deal when people realized, oh, this is a greenhouse gas. We shouldn't have that anymore.
That's a case study in what happens if you have a federal policy that slowly eliminates a bad product over time. We were really successful in eliminating those aerosols. So that was a success story in the environmental world.
And in this case with the methane, in many cases, there is already technology that has been installed at these well sites that would allow them to capture or to safely deal with the methane that comes out of these wells. And in fact, they can even do some processes to turn it back into fuel to further fuel their operation or to sell it into the market. And when it's not profitable or easy, it tends to get turned off even when it's there. And to my mind, that's what's going on here.
Absolutely. And without any sort of regulation requiring the companies to capture it instead of just venting it or flaring it, it's also lost money for the state of Texas. And it's a waste of a natural resource. And so, finding ways to monitor and capture methane is really important when you talk about dealing with fracking and natural gas.
Yep. So not only are we being irresponsible with the things that we are taking out of the environment, but the things that we are using to get it, we're still not being responsible with those things either. And we could do better.
There's been a little bit of progress. Newer wells are a little bit better, but ultimately it's nowhere where it needs to be in order to deal with both local impacts and climate change.
Right. So I understand the theory of like not having an across the board ban, but I also feel like we really need to push hard on what is our next step, right? Because we're at fracking now and we have other options that are out there, but neither our state or really the federal has been pushing really hard to get industry to try to make our environment still productive, but cleaner. What do you guys have as far as ideas about that?
Yeah, and I know that at the state level, there hasn't been a huge push in Texas to deal with some of these issues around fracking because a lot can be done at the state level. And whether it's adopting regulations to control flaring or to limit venting or to have to monitor leaks at oil and gas wells, which has been proven to reduce emissions significantly. All of that can be passed by the state legislatures. And so it really needs to be pushed for at that level. And then, the other thing is developing and investing in clean energy technologies will eventually take up a larger share of our energy generation. And so it's kind of this balance between investing in other resources and cleaning up and making sure that we're doing best practices for the resources that we already have. And, natural gas will continue to play a role in our energy system for at least another couple years, and we know this. And so it's got to be this balance between regulating these dirty sources, acknowledging that we're still going to need them, particularly for hard to decarbonize areas of the economy, and then investing in the clean energy technologies that can replace them and that can help clean them up in the future.
Awesome. I want to talk about those clean energy technologies because I think that's really important. But I did have there were a couple questions that had to do with fracking, and I don't want to move on before we talk about it, before we finish that. One question is, I guess this isn't fracking, but it's what do you think of Biden's clean energy plan that just dropped? And do you think it can get us to zero carbon by 2050?
Well, I love this question because this is what I work on. I really like and appreciate Biden's new climate plan. I think that their team has taken advice from a lot of different folks, both academics, people from the environmental justice community, and more progressive and more center groups to really come together to put a strong climate plan out there. In particular, I like the approach that the Biden campaign is taking with implementing some of these, we call performance standards, which is basically mandating for each sector of the economy growing shares of clean energy or improved energy efficiency or reduced emissions. And by having these standards in place, we can really guarantee that we'll meet our climate goals. So for example, the Biden campaign includes a 100% clean energy standard that would require increasing shares of clean energy. I think it's out until 2035 in his plan. And so we absolutely support a CES, and we're excited to see these types of standards included. And then I also liked a lot of aspects that focus on investments into clean energy technologies. We liked that it was technology neutral and included nuclear and carbon capture, which we love to see. So overall, we were really happy with the plan. And as far as whether or not it will get us to zero by 50, I think it will get us a major chunk of the way there. And it can be really difficult to answer that because we believe that you need targeted solutions for each sector of the economy. I think this will get us a big chunk of the way there. It's a little difficult to guess, and I'd want a little modeling to make sure I knew
right.
exactly if it would, but I think it's an excellent start.
Yeah, every state is different for sure. And I appreciate the fact that these ideas can be broad enough to be inclusive of the different conditions in each state.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, John has brought up the fact that natural gas powers most electricity generation in Texas. Yes, this is true, but that doesn't mean that we have to stay there.
It is true. You are also the #1 producer of wind in the country and the 4th producer of solar in the country. So, as these shares continue to grow, I think clean energy will become a greater and greater portion. And some of these CESs, they meet utilities where they're at. They're not saying you need to go from where you're at right now to like 60% renewables, by the next year. A lot of them take into account where we're at and help realistically set targets, ensure that we get there. And a big philosophy for Third Way's climate and energy program is we would couple these types of policies with investments and support in order to make sure that it was affordable and that you can meet these goals instead of just putting the standard in and hanging them out to dry. We also need to step up on the investment front and invest in these clean energy technologies to make sure they're affordable.
Okay, I love that. So can you talk about a little bit about these different options? I'm sure there's some that everybody know about, and maybe there's some that we're not clear on, and then how we can realistically get there to where we are carbon neutral.
Yeah, so there are a lot that we already have that we need to massively increase our rate of deployment. These are the fan favorites of wind and solar and storage, which partner really well together. And these energy technologies will play a huge role in decarbonizing the power sector in particular. But we will also need some what we call like firm dispatchable resources, which just means that you can use the resource and dispatch it whenever you need it. This could be nuclear, it can be hydro, it could be biomass, and these are other zero carbon resources that can help balance out the grid to make sure that it's still reliable. While wind and solar and storage are improving, there's still some issues with flexibility that we need to deal with. And so like the last 20-ish%, depending on how we go about it, will need to be not wind and solar, but some other form of zero carbon technology. And so that's part of the reason why we're supportive of this technology inclusive approach. And then, I'm happy to talk about a bunch of other ones. I think the ones that we work on that people might be less familiar with, but are super cool, are carbon capture and advanced nuclear. So yeah, I'm happy to talk about any of those, Jeremy.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I know that you mentioned that we are #1 in wind, and I just want to stress to people that Texas, while yes, we have a history in oil and gas, we are big time into wind, and a lot of us may not realize that, but we still have so much more potential because there is tons of land and tons of wind out in West Texas, and it is all we need is enough power transmission lines from West Texas to here, which they have upgraded now, so there is capacity, and we can use that source, especially, I know that wind cannot be, it's possible that wind is not the most reliable source, but in the middle of the heat of the day, when the wind is blowing out in West Texas, it can help take up that slack in our grid where we're under super high demand when everybody's air conditioner is kicking on in the middle of summertime in Texas. So I feel like that and solar are really could work well together if like you've got your wind turbine in the field and then you've also got your solar panels out in the field. There's real potential for Texas to continue to be a leader and get stronger in that.
Absolutely.
But it doesn't seem like we have any incentives from our legislature to do things like that, but we could.
You have a 100% or not 100%, I forget what percent. You have a renewable energy standard out till 2025, I think. But I forget the details of it. But you could pass a state CES, and that would increase in large amounts of wind and solar.
Yep. It's a step in the right direction for sure. Mm-hmm. So that's a resource that we already have. As far as carbon capture and storage, do you want to tell us what you guys are thinking on that?
Yeah, so carbon capture and storage is actually super neat and relevant to Texas. And Texas has several carbon capture and storage facilities in your state where you are leading the way in developing and testing out this technology. And so there are a couple different types of carbon capture and storage. You can put it on natural gas plants or industrial facilities. And it also is closely related to what's called direct air capture, which can suck emissions right out of the air and store them. And so carbon capture and storage, we view as a really important technology in helping to decarbonize the entire economy, not just the power sector. Because when you look at areas like the industrial sector, there are a lot of different processes that require high heat and fossil fuels like natural gas that will likely continue to use for a while. And if you can use carbon capture and storage along with the natural gas, then that makes that technology viable in a zero carbon future. So it's a up and coming. We still need to invest more in the innovation of carbon capture and storage, but it's a real technology, and we're making our way there. And there are some examples in your home state of carbon capture and storage facilities.
Is there anybody working on something to do with this carbon that could be useful instead of just like pumping it into the ground or something?
Absolutely. So that's called carbon use. They can make shoes out of carbon. So that's where we're at right now. But we would like to continue this entire field of carbon use, because if you can use the carbon, obviously it becomes a lot more valuable. And so there's a whole area of research that's focused specifically on carbon use. Beyond that, the options are for enhanced oil recovery or just permanent storage in geological formations. So, from the carbon use standpoint, that's a huge opportunity that the industry is pursuing.
That's cool. I'm going to have to go Google myself some carbon shoes now. I didn't even know that.
I had a colleague that bought them, so that's the reason I know.
That's cool. And so I want to talk about cement plants, but let's go to nuclear, because I feel like that fits in with what we're talking about. So when I think of nuclear, it is I'm dating myself again, but it seems very scary and not something that many of me or my friends would be interested in, because it's seen as such a dangerous technology. But the quick things that I've seen about advanced nuclear kind of indicate that that is not the case. So can you tell us why it isn't, and why, or how it isn't dangerous and why?
Yeah, I will do my best. I came at this a little bit similar to how you did, Jeremy. I was very skeptical of nuclear energy early in my career, and I worked in Germany for a year, and Germans are very anti-nuclear. So that was like a whole part of my educational background. But the more I've learned about it, the more I've realized that this is actually a super cool technology. It's like not your granddad's nuclear, or however you want to say it. And there are a lot of different types of advanced nuclear designs. So it's not like just one type of nuclear reactor that you're talking about. I think there's like 9 different types that people are working on right now. And they're very, very different from the giant light water reactors that we have across the nation today. There are a lot of benefits that come with these new designs. One being they're more safe than our current reactors, because they don't use high pressure, and they don't use or really water as a coolant. At least many of the designs don't. And so they're not really relying on humans to shut them down. So there's a huge safety component to this. One example is they have a design that they're working on where the fluid-filled molten salt reactor is what it's called, which is like wordy. But the bottom line is that if it were to overheat, it just melts a plug in the bottom of the reactor, and it drains out into a catch basin where it's cooled. And so gravity takes care of it for you. And so these like horror stories that people envision when they think about nuclear and meltdowns, they, wouldn't happen in these advanced reactor designs, which is really neat. And there's also decreased proliferation risk. And so they're much more difficult to turn into any sort of weapon. And in fact, they actually can use some of the fuels that came from weapons technologies. And so they're much safer from the proliferation side as well. And there's like a whole thing I could get into on that. And then waste, which is always the big kind of question around nuclear, understandably, because we're still working on finding a way to do this in the United States to our best of our ability. But what's cool about some of these new reactors is they can actually use the spent fuel from other reactors. And this can help address concerns of waste coming from other reactors and make sure that you're like recycling the waste in a way. And other types of designs, because they're all totally different, just produce less waste to begin with. So yeah, like our normal reactors, we will refuel every 18 to 24 months. Some of these designs you don't need to touch for 20 plus years. And so there's significantly less waste. You know, they're way easier to put into communities. They're not as large. They're safer. The proliferation risk is low, and it helps us deal with our waste issues. So it's actually a really neat technology. I've been converted.
Okay, so I want to back up for a minute because when somebody says a nuclear power plant, in my mind, even if they put the word advanced in front of it, I'm still picturing like down in Glen Rose. I know you probably haven't seen it, but there's this giant dome that you can see for miles around when you drive into the area. Or maybe you think of, you know, some of the disasters that have been on TV, and they're these big, huge facilities, and nobody wants that in their neighborhood. How is this advanced nuclear different? What does it look like?
I love this question. We did an entire series on like reimagining advanced nuclear, and we worked with an architectural firm to draw pictures of how advanced nuclear reactors would look integrated into communities, because you're right, they're totally different. There's new reactors that look like they're just in a little cabin, like Oklo is one of the advanced reactor companies, and they've got this gorgeous design where the entire reactor looks like this tiny little cabin, and it's beautiful. And, you know, so the way that we picture advanced reactors right now, it's almost an entirely different technology. Like they both have to do with nuclear, and that's, you know, that's really quite it. So yeah, I would encourage everyone, I'll share it with you, Jeremy, but it was a fun project kind of helping people visualize what these reactors could actually look like, and seeing that they're not these big, ugly cement things that you can't get anywhere near. They're actually kind of, they could be beautiful facilities.
Okay, so it is safer, and it can not look like a giant dome, and the waste is way less. So
Yeah.
I feel like you went over the waste, and maybe I missed it, or maybe it's just like hard to imagine, but can you give us some kind of like a visual representation of the comparison of the waste and how much comes out of this and how much comes out of an old school or light water reactor?
Yes, I am forgetting, we have a graphic on this actually somewhere, but it is, I don't have a good comparison off the top of my head. I will have to find one for you, because I know
Okay.
that the wonderful woman, Jackie Kemper, who manages our nuclear portfolio, this is actually technically outside of my work. She really leads this work, and I know that she has this neat infographic that shows that. But I mean, I feel like the comparison between needing to be refueled every 18 to 24 months versus 20 years gives you a pretty good indication of the amount of waste that comes out of these reactors. They're also significantly more efficient and use different types of fuels that some of them, you know, wouldn't have much waste at all. And so even they're considering some designs that could be exported to other countries, and you wouldn't need to build any sort of nuclear waste facility in those countries. It would just stay within the facility and be completely fine.
I feel like this is one of those instances where, like, when rechargeable batteries first came out, they were NiCad batteries, and they had, quote, memory built into them. And so you could use it, and then it would drain out. And the more you used it and charged it and then drained it, it would, the shorter amount of time that it would last. And if you didn't run it all the way out, and then you didn't, and then before you recharged it, then it would totally mess up the battery, and then you just have to throw it away. And by the way, they're usually no good within a year, so you had to throw them away anyway. And then somebody came along with lithium ion, and now you can charge it up whenever you feel like it or have access to a plug. And the lithium ion battery is going to last for 2-3 years. So not to say that lithium ion doesn't have an environmental fingerprint. That's not what I'm getting at. But like, the technology seems like it has done a leapfrog to the point where it may be more, it deserves another look.
Yeah, I would definitely argue that. And a lot of these technologies still there's some significant innovation that needs to be done on them. A lot of these are, the idea is conceptualized. There are like I think 5 different ones that are working with the Nuclear Regulatory Committee to get their designs approved. And so they're in various stages, and we do need to put some more work into them in order to have them become a real viable commercialized technology. But the potential benefits of them to me make it worthwhile investing in these. And, we would argue one of our philosophies is that you don't want to put all of your eggs in one basket. You don't want to bet on just one technology. So we don't want to bet on some miraculous breakthrough in batteries, or we don't want to bet that carbon capture becomes the save all and we can just put it on all of our fossil fuels. We want to invest in a bunch of different clean energy technologies that we can foresee that we're going to need for all areas of the economy, and hope that a lot of them succeed. And so even with some of these different nuclear reactor designs, we want to encourage a diversity of innovation in these different designs to see, what's going to work out the best and for different purposes. So, yeah.
So are there any current incentives or programs that the government is putting toward these advanced nuclear? And
Yeah,
how far out is it until we could get one of these?
Yes. So we're actually hoping to have some demonstration projects completed by 2025. And by 2030, have some in the commercialization phase. I'll have to triple check with Jackie that I got those dates right, because she'll kill me if I got them wrong. But as far as the federal funding side goes, there is a huge push and a lot of federal support on the innovation front for advanced nuclear reactors, which we like to see. Also, a lot of these companies work with the national labs in order to help advance their technologies, which is really neat because the national labs have a lot of wonderful facilities and expertise that some of these companies can benefit from. So there's been a lot of effort from the federal government to help advance reactors, and there are some additional policies underway to help with demonstration projects in particular, and some power purchase agreements for advanced reactors. So that's kind of the next step.
Okay. But they're definitely not working against it. So that is good news. But we could do better.
This is bipartisan, actually.
Right.
Democrats and Republicans both agree that this is a technology worth investing in. So that's kind of a blessing.
Okay, I'm going to read this question, but I don't know what it means.
Oh gosh, okay.
It says, do you think SMRs and microreactors will be here soon enough to get us to zero carbon in time? It's because I don't know what an SMR is.
It's a small modular reactor. It's one of the types of the advanced nuclear. That's a good question, because with the rate that the technology is developing, I think it's possible that the closer we get to 2050, we will have some of these SMRs and other advanced reactor types commercialized. And I think that would be very exciting. I also think that we're not just racing to 2050, and then if we miss the mark, we're done. So we need to continue to do our best. Every bit of like carbon that we prevent from entering the atmosphere saves us a bit of global warming. And so we should be investing in technologies that right now might seem a little bit far out, but will become important and can help us in the future. So my answer is kind of a yes and answer. I think that it is a possibility that we'll have these technologies in time. Of course, I can't predict the future, and I'm not one of the researchers working in the lab on these technologies. But given where they are right now, it seems very promising that we will. And also, we should be investing in them anyways, because this isn't a zero-sum game.
Yep, for sure. And I really like that. I feel like we as Democrats focus very much on the environmental aspect and forget to talk to all of our constituents and stress the fact that this is a national security issue. Like, if we we in Texas know how proud we are of being like the energy engine of the country and being able to say, yes, we'll have energy for the next 100 years. But if we could do it in multiple different ways, that's like having a backup for your backup.
Absolutely. And we talked a bit on the national security front for advanced nuclear. There are countries like Russia and China that are pursuing these technologies. And if we forfeit this space, there's a huge national security components and geopolitical consequences to that as well. only right now of the nuclear reactors that are being sent from one country to another across the world, Russia provides 37%, China 28%, the US provides 7%. So we're already kind of slowing down and forfeiting this space a little bit. And so there are geopolitical consequences as well, and just kind of giving up in the nuclear space.
Yep. Okay. This question is a little long. It says AOC's Green New Deal was met in Congress with a more centrist offer of zero carbon emission in 30 years. Democratic environmental politics have been called bipolar. Maya Van Rossum's book, The Green Amendment, proposes a constitutional environmental rights amendment to overcome the patchwork of state regulations. What do you think about the Green Amendment?
The Green Amendment. I am not sure if I'm super familiar with the Green Amendment. So I hesitate to answer on that legislation specifically. I would like to answer a bit on the first part of the question, which is about this kind of divide between the AOC Green New Deal proposal and some of the other proposals that have come out of the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis and, House Energy and Commerce. I actually think that there's a lot more that these groups agree on than disagree on. And, we tend to focus on the areas of disagreement. But when you actually look at the plans and you pull out the specifics, there's a lot of overlap. And we saw that with the Biden plan, which came in with, recommendations from former Bernie staffers that were able to come to agreement. And so, I'm excited to see where these plans intersect. And, the AOC Green New Deal was technology inclusive. She came out and said that she supports nuclear and that it's part of the solution. She might be a little reluctant about it, but she acknowledges that it could be an important technology. And so there's very little that we disagree on. We might disagree on we should decarbonize 5 years faster, 10 years faster, whatever. But what we do over the next 10 years, I think there's huge agreement on, because we pretty much know what we need to do to get us on the right path. So at this stage, what the Democrats are putting forward is a hell of a lot better than what we're seeing on the other side of the aisle. And at least we're negotiating some nuances in the policy designs, not whether or not this is something we should actually be investing in.
Okay. All right. I like what you had to say about that. That's, I like how you put it too, because I do feel like, and not just with environment, but I feel like with many, many issues, probably 80% of the issues that happen in our politics, there are many of us who do agree on the majority of those issues, and we get caught up on the parts that we want to fight about, and then nothing gets done. And I appreciate the fact that you guys are willing to have a conversation to try to push forward, at least take a step, right? Because if you don't take a step, then you're going nowhere.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's talk about, I didn't see any more questions on advanced solar, but if you guys have any other questions, please drop them in the chat. I'm trying to pay attention. Let's talk about cement plants, because many people out there may not realize, but you've got Dallas, Fort Worth, and Denton kind of makes up a little triangle. But if you extended that triangle down south, the bottom of that opposite triangle would be Midlothian. And in that smallish town of Midlothian, there are cement plants. And in the summertime, like now, the majority of our wind blows from Mexico from the south and blows up into Texas. And it blows all of the stuff that comes out of those cement plants right over the top of DFW. Do you have any information about how cement plants and that impacts the citizens and what we can do about that?
Yeah, so, I know less on this specific case study. I did a bit of research, and it looks like the owner of one of the cement plants has requested a permit to basically double its emissions. And so the first thing that stands out to me is there are ways to improve the efficiency of a plant and to use the most modern technologies. And so they should be looking to improve the efficiency of their plant and upgrade the facility rather than seeking these additional permits to just increase their emissions. The other thing that I wanted to touch on, which isn't really as much of an immediate solution, is that there are ways to create zero carbon cement. And this is an up and coming field as people have looked at how to deal with the cement industry, which is responsible for something like 7% of global emissions. Cement is a huge source of emissions. And so, it has to be a combination of reducing demand by using recycled materials, improving efficiency, which could be done at this plant in your issue, using material substitutions, improving energy efficiency in the process, and then also finding ways to decarbonize the production. So there are like new cement chemistries, which I don't know enough about to get into, that release less emissions. You can also use zero carbon sources for the heat generation in the process, which would make a big difference. And then carbon capture can be applied to cement facilities. So there are solutions that could help decarbonize cement plants. Some of them are a little bit further off, but the immediate actions of improving the plant's efficiency and building newer and better facilities should really be a priority immediately.
Yep. And I feel like I'm going to have to go do research on this, but I feel like there were waivers that were given out by the state for these cement plants too.
I'm not sure. You might know.
Yeah, so I will have to go look it up. John says roughly right across DFW Airport. Yep. And it's not a cement plant. It's a hazmat incinerator. The cement is a side hustle. Not sure.
John seems to know.
I don't know.
We do.
So, okay. But as far as cement goes, can you talk about like what comes out of a cement plant and how does it impact the people that come in contact with those emissions?
Yeah, so there is a lot of different emissions in particulate matter, nitrogen oxide, sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, which is just a bunch of different pollutants that can come out. And there are some very serious air quality issues that come along with this, including a lot of heart and respiratory health issues. And so, the local air pollution impact is huge for these communities and, increases asthma rates. As someone who has it, I know how detrimental it can be. And, it makes a big difference. Not just, I guess I focused a bit more on the climate front, but the public health issues really mean a lot. And as you mentioned, the heat in the summer makes the issue worse and it traps a lot of these particles and it really kind of exacerbates the smog situation. And so the unfortunate part about climate change is a lot of the issues just kind of build on top of each other. As the heat increases in Texas and as like by the end of the century, you'll have 30 to 60 more days a year above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And all of these issues will begin to compound on themselves. And so that's why it's important to deal with some of these issues now and to not forget the public health component.
Okay. And so there are technologies, they're new and they're probably expensive, but if we, as a community or state or federal at any level, all levels, if we invested in those solutions, it would drive down the cost, right?
Yeah. And I know that some of these long game things don't help now, but it would drive down the cost. These technologies will become more affordable. They'll make investing in all these technologies just reduces the cost by billions of dollars every single year. And so that's why we need to invest now in these technologies. You might not see the immediate results, but we will see the results and it will make a huge difference in the next 10, 20, 30 years.
Right. I feel like a lot of people like discount anything that isn't going to work like tomorrow, but there really just isn't like all technology takes a long time to develop, and everything that seems like it happened overnight, it really got developed over years or decades. And we just need to do the investment now, because if we don't start now, it's just going to prolong the end time when we actually get to implement the technology.
Absolutely. And some of the technologies that are widely successful today, the government invested in the base technologies originally, including fracking. And so this is why we support a lot of federal research, development, demonstration, deployment dollars, because it makes a huge difference in actually getting to the commercialization of these different clean energy technologies.
Yep. And it's not like we're going to stop using cement anytime soon. It's not going anywhere.
No, it's really difficult to replace. There are like some substitutions, but yeah, we have it like everywhere. We use it, and yeah.
Okay, so let's see. Just looking to see, is there anything that has to do with the justice component that we haven't covered in this conversation?
Oh, one thing I did want to talk about was the issue of energy cost burden, which I think is really important when you talk about some of these climate policies. So energy cost burden is just the amount of money that you're spending, the amount of your income that you're spending on your energy costs. And so, I a while back headed up a project for the New York City Mayor's office looking at the energy cost burden for different demographics across the city. And so frequently communities of color and low income households have a significantly higher energy cost burden than the rest of the communities. And so, you have families that are making the real decision of, am I going to buy groceries this month or am I going to pay my energy bill? And that sounds like a pretty intense scenario, but it's happening to people all across the country. And, in a state like Texas, where the heat is going to continue to increase, and, that's going to cause larger energy demand as you look to use more AC and increase your energy use, that's only going to increase the amount that people have to spend on their energy. And so this is one area of environmental justice that I think is really important, is helping make sure that low income communities and communities of color do not suffer an undue burden just to pay their energy bills. And it's something that we have to be conscientious of in almost every single climate policy that we're looking to create.
And so what initiatives do you guys see helping to solve that problem?
There are a lot of different programs that can help with energy efficiency and improving appliances, which make a big difference for some of these households. When you're struggling to pay your rent, you're not going to replace your old appliances, and you're not going to live in an efficient building. And then those energy costs just keep piling up. So, there are some wonderful programs, including like LIHEAP, which is for low income households, that can help with energy efficiency and appliance issues. And then in kind of a broader sense, we should make sure that money goes back to the low income households when we're crafting climate policy. So, I talked a little bit earlier about like clean energy standards. You can build into the policy provisions where money goes back to households or exempt from households that are below a certain income threshold. And so you need to be really smart when you're thinking about these policies. Is it going to impact these communities more? And if so, how can I build it into the policy design that they're not?
Okay, that makes sense. And it made me think, it reminded me that in Texas, there is actually a program that they have put in that focuses on specific ways to try to make homes more energy efficient as it relates to air conditioning, because we all know that that is the biggest drain on our demand on our electric grid in the summertime. Things like your windows and door jambs and attic insulation, all of those things, and replacing your air conditioner unit with a more efficient unit. All of those things have programs, not sometimes subsidies, sometimes they're free, sometimes they're discounts or incentives that we already have in the state of Texas. This is not impossible, and these types of things can be done if there was enough awareness and movement toward those policies, specifically as it relates to like appliance replacement.
Yeah, every bit makes a difference. And, it particularly just not for your energy bill, but also reducing electricity consumption. And so this is low hanging fruit, and every bit helps.
Yep. And again, I think this is bipartisan. We already have it.
Everyone loves saving money, so we can all agree.
Right. Yeah. And I think in my mind, I think everyone doesn't want to waste electricity either. We just have to talk about it in a way that's makes sense to people.
Yeah, so. Absolutely.
Okay, we have another question. Could a carbon tax and dividend help communities of color with energy burdens?
The short answer is yes, it could. So with a tax and dividend, which we're supportive of a carbon tax, we view it as one policy among a suite of policies that we need.
We haven't really talked about that. Can you kind of just give us the quick rundown of what that is?
Yeah. So any sort of putting a price on carbon, whether you're doing some sort of cap and trade system or just outright taxing the carbon, is kind of an OG climate policy proposal where basically you're internalizing the cost of the negative externality, which is the carbon emissions. And we're very supportive of the policy. You know, it's a very economically efficient policy, and it has a lot of benefits. And that being said, we would not want to rely on some sort of carbon price in order to meet our climate goals for a couple different reasons. One of them being that they're never priced high enough to actually get us where we need to go. There's a lot of reasons why they're not priced high enough, both political and because we're not ready with the technologies to be able to deal with it. But the reality is that we have seen almost maybe like 2 or 3 carbon prices globally that even come close to being remotely what they would need to be. And the majority are under like $25 and don't make a huge impact on the emissions front. And also they're subject to market changes. And so, you know, you have some examples like in Europe where the price of the carbon started here and then it plummeted and then it kind of went back up later. So this is one reason why we think it needs to be partnered with things like standards that just guarantee that you're going to get where you need to get. We've wasted enough time at this point. We need policies in place that ensure that we're going to reduce our emissions when we need to reduce our emissions. That being said, and to the point of the question, we think a carbon price can be very useful as a source of revenue, and how you spend that revenue could be allocated specifically to communities of color or low-income communities. And so, you know, with a carbon dividend, I would encourage people to look at how we're using the revenue that you're getting from the carbon. And I would argue that you'd want to make sure that a lot of more money is going towards lower income households, and that the money that might be going to higher income households maybe go to other clean energy investments. And so that would be my ideal approach. That being said, like, I'll take anything. Like, if we finally agree to do some sort of like tax and dividend policy, you know, I will be very supportive of it. I just think there's probably a better use of the revenue, but it can help address some of these environmental justice issues as well, depending on how you use it.
Yep.
I feel like I had a million caveats.
Everything there. Because like I could see a world in which a market gets created and then like the end goal of reducing carbon emissions never gets achieved because everyone is focused on making profit based on swapping and trading all of the.
When you're just kind of guessing what you think the social cost of carbon is in order to set the price in the first place. And it also does a great job of reducing emissions in the power sector, but it doesn't even begin to touch transportation and industry until it's at much higher dollar amounts, which you probably won't see. So, you know, that's why we would encourage not thinking of it as the only solution or some sort of silver bullet solution, but part of a larger mix.
Yeah, for sure. The easy answer I have found is usually not the right answer.
Unfortunately. And I hear myself having caveats for like everything I say, but I'm, you know.
Yeah. Sound bites they sound good, but they rarely take into account all of the little pieces and components that really are necessary to craft good policy.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
I appreciate that y'all are focused on that. Okay. All right. I don't see any other questions. So if you could pick like 1, 2, or 3 different ideas that you really would want people to focus on and advocate for, what are those pieces that you would tell people to do?
I love this question. And of course, I'm inclined to answer it a little bit more federally facing just because that's where my focus is. One thing I would really love to see happen is a federal clean energy standard. I think cleaning up the grid is such an important part of dealing with climate change. And as we electrify transportation and we have more EVs, and as we electrify our heating and our industrial processes, we're just going to have more and more electricity demand. And so, to me, getting a clean energy standard passed at the federal level is something that I think could be achievable and is really, really important. So that's a big one. My second one would be really investing in the innovation for some of these future technologies. We need to ensure that we have the technologies we need to get all the way to 0 by 50. And there are a lot of different assessments telling us that we can get a big way there, but not all of the way there. And so because we know it takes time, investing in these technologies now. And so, I would put innovation up there in my bucket. And then I would do my third one as investments in infrastructure and deployment of technologies, which is like a cheat answer because it's a kind of catch-all. But this is something that can put a lot of people to work really quickly, that has long-term economic benefits, which will help us as we're entering a recession now and dealing with this economic crisis, and it can help us advance our climate goals. So investments in sustainable infrastructure, I think, are really important right now. And there's some effort right now at the federal level to pass an infrastructure package that deals with some of these issues. But I think that's absolutely essential because it's big job creators, which we need, and it'll help us deal with the climate crisis.
Absolutely. And that could not be more true than in Texas, because we have so many people who have worked on in the oil and gas industry. And now, because of not just the coronavirus, but because the price of natural gas has dropped so low, it's not profitable for the companies to continue to work on that. And so they've laid everyone off. So
Right.
there is an entire job force out there that is ready to go to work and literally could build the future with these infrastructure of the future, like you're talking about, if we just had people who were willing to make it happen.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So besides voting and being informed and talking to your friends and things like that, are there ways that you guys recommend people get involved, or things that we can do to try to make the most change?
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head with the big one. Voting is super, super essential. And I think you mentioned earlier getting people registered to vote, helping people understand and where to go vote and all of that, dealing with issues of voter suppression and making sure, particularly during this giant pandemic, that people can vote from home and mail in their ballots. All of this is really essential, and your vote does make a big difference. The other thing that people can do is talk and reach out to their state legislatures. We talked earlier about all of some issues that can be dealt with at the state level. And if people are putting pressure on them, we've seen some success in other states. And so, I always recommend people call their representatives, write them letters. It does make a difference, and your voice matters. And so, that's something that each of us can do individually. And with something like climate change, the majority of the issues coming from a couple giant corporations. And so it can feel very difficult to contribute, but little changes that we make in our life, little efforts to improve energy efficiency and to, play our part in reducing emissions, they do make a difference.
Awesome. All right. I love that, because I think that is right in line with what all the volunteers that I work with and all the people that I know is we're focused on doing. Even if we don't do the giant things, we can do a bunch of little things, and over time it adds up and it does make a difference. So
absolutely.
Anyway, I know I've already kept you longer than an hour. We've gone over. We don't have a specific time, and I appreciate you sticking around and answering these questions. This has been wonderful, and I feel like if people want to get involved and learn more about Third Way, going to the website thirdway.org, right?
Yep.
Is a good place to go and get involved, read up on the different technologies that are being worked on. As always, you need to come out and vote. You need to help register your friends and family. And even if you have friends that you don't think that they're Democrats, but you know that they care about high electricity prices in the summertime and energy inefficiency and trying to make sure that their grandkids and their great grandkids can have clean air and water, these are all things that all Texans want to be focused on. So please make sure that you go out and vote for sure and engage all of your friends and family on these issues. It can be done, especially if we talk about it in a bipartisan way. So I want to thank you for being involved in our Facebook Live tonight. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy. I really enjoyed it. And of course, anyone can reach out to me. My email's on the Third Way website. I'm always happy to answer questions or dive into any of the million topics that we covered.
Awesome. Yep. I know we hit it all quick. So please, y'all go do some research and check it out. It's really cool stuff. So thanks again, Lindsey. And thank you all out there in Facebook land for tuning into our Facebook Live Friday. We do this every Friday at 6:30. So please tune in next week. We'll have another great guest and another great conversation. Thanks again, y'all. Have a good week. Stay safe.